Hey everyone, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode we are going to finish the rod change gearbox, so stay tuned. Alright, so welcome back to Classic Mini DIY, and like I said, this is going to be the last rod change gearbox episode. We are going to finish this up, we're going to replace this little bearing here, we're going to put the diff on, we're going to wrap it all up, and then this wonderful completely rebuilt gearbox is going to go up for sale on eBay. So at the moment that this video went live, so did the listing for this gearbox. So if you are interested in buying this gearbox and supporting the channel directly, all the funds that come from this gearbox are going straight back into the channel. I have some really cool big stuff planned for the year. And just to give you guys a little bit of a rundown of what you'd be buying, this is a fully rebuilt rod change gearbox. It will come with the diff assembled, which I'm going to show you how to do in this episode. That is going to be a full cross pin differential. So this thing is not going to fail on you. This is like as strong as it can get. Also, the gearbox has been fully cleaned. All the gears have been cleaned. The synchro hubs are freshly rebuilt, and it will have a 3.44 gear ratio. And if for some reason you want to change that out, that isn't too hard to do. You know, you don't have to take apart the whole gearbox. You can get yourself a different final drive gear, but a 3.44 is going to give you a lot of nice little pickup in the bottom end, and it's going to be great for zipping around the city. It's not going to be the best for the highway, but the Mini wasn't really designed for highway driving anyways. Now, one other thing I do want to mention, I've been trying not to mention this in every one of my episodes because I'm sure it can get really tiring, but if you guys feel like supporting the channel, one way that really helps me is by picking up merch from my merch store. I sell t-shirts with this old logo, with the new logo. I've got some other designs like an old mini speedometer silhouette, all sorts of really cool stuff. And if you guys feel like supporting the channel directly and maybe you don't want a whole gearbox, that is a great way to do it. And it really helps me pay for, you know, big projects like this, because rebuilding a gearbox is not cheap. The last thing I do want to mention is that I got another sticker from a group I found on Instagram, the Little Car Society, and I got a sticker. I put it on my toolbox right up here, and I also got one for the back of my car. I'm super excited. It's a fun little sticker. The Mini is like what embodies the Little Car Society, I think. So if you guys are interested in picking up one of those, I put a link to their store in the description. Head over there and consider supporting someone who is helping to build up the Mini community and encouraging the use of small cars, which is always something I'm a fan of. Now, let's dive into the gearbox. So step over here. Now, on the last episode, we were finishing up torquing down the final motion gear as well as the pinion nut. One thing I do want to mention is that while my Haynes manual actually said that these were 90 foot-pounds, these need to be torqued down to 150 foot-pounds. My Haynes manual was a little out of date, and they since revised that torque spec, so this needs to be 150 foot-pounds on both sides, which will help hold all of that stuff together. Now, before we tackle the diff, there's one thing that we need to get out, and that is this roller bearing right here, so I can replace it with a brand new one. And for this job, I finally upgraded myself to a ball peen hammer. That's right. One beautiful fiberglass handle ball peen hammer used for banging the shit out of stuff. Now, I've been informed of a small little way that you can get this race out of here. You can use a punch, but you're not going to be applying even pressure to this thing. So what I've been told by 7 Mini Parts is you can take a socket and set that right up against the bearing face here, one that's just a little smaller than that hole, and then you hammer the socket, and this race should come out. So I actually am going to tilt this gearbox on its side because it's going to be a little bit easier, and then I'll take my beautiful new ball peen hammer and we're going to hammer this out. All right, and so there we have our old roller bearing. This thing is in really rough shape. I'm really glad that I'm gonna get this replaced in here. Now, these roller bearings actually come in 2 different sizes, and this is one of the things that kind of differentiates, you know, the different transfer cases and the generations of Minis that you guys have. Now, on my earlier 1275, this is actually smaller, so this is what's considered a big roller bearing. And there is a smaller roller bearing for your idler gear that sits down in here. The post is actually smaller on earlier cars. So with the larger shaft that will go in here and hold that idler gear in place, you're gonna have a more robust gearbox, so it's nice that this one already has that. Now here's our new idler bearing. Now you can see these are much different in quality. This one is really nice. This got sent over to me by 7 Mini Parts. And what I'll do before putting that in there is try to get this nice and clean in here, because this is going to be extra dirty. Now we'll take the new one, get it lined up there. And what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and take this socket and hammer it in with the socket, so I'm not actually hammering the bearing face. All right, and so now this has a brand new roller bearing in there. It's looking really good. The way that you can tell that this is all the way in place is this will actually sit on the inner face of your gearbox in here. It's difficult for me to show you, but there's a small lip, so it can't really go any farther. And the hammering noise that you hear when you're hammering that will start to change a little bit. Once you know that is in place, it'll sound more solid. Now, with that out of the way, the next thing that we're gonna do is turn this on its face here, and we're gonna install our diff. Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna do is something called preloading the differential, and then we're gonna be putting the differential output cover on. We're gonna make sure the seal is on this selector rod here, and then after that, we'll actually be basically done. This is often a step that is left out or kind of like breezed over when putting together a transmission, and I'm not really sure why. People seem to think that this whole preloading a differential is like really complicated and hard, and it's really not. So basically what you're going to be doing is setting your diff down in here, but you are going to need to install your carrier bearings right here. And basically you have these single roller bearings like this, and this one is one of the really high quality single roller bearings that 7 Mini Parts sells. I strongly recommend getting a really high quality carrier. It's just going to prolong the life of your differential and your gearbox, you know, and making sure to set yourself up for success in the future. So the next thing that we're gonna do is install these roller bearings. It's really simple to do. I mean, basically you just set over the output shaft, and then basically you just hammer it down evenly. And I found that a 34mm socket goes over perfectly, sets it down right on that inner race, and you can hammer from the other side straight down. And so the key here is to make sure that race sits down on the actual lip of your differential. The same thing can be said for the other side. You want it to evenly and completely sit down on the face. So you can see this one right over here, perfectly on that face. So then once you have those bearings in, the next thing is to actually set this down into place. Let that set down into the actual pinion gear that's inside your gearbox, and we're gonna have to set our preload now. And so in order to do that, you're gonna need your gaskets, the new gaskets that are gonna go in. You will also need your output covers here. This will go over these shafts right here. And then finally, an assortment of shims for your differential. Now, the nice thing about these shims is if they're in relatively good shape, they can actually be cleaned up and reused. So if you're ever taking apart a gearbox, or you have a carrier or something and you notice there's some shims on there, hold on to them, they're good to have. But the whole idea here is that you have a zero clearance setup here on your differential. And now that doesn't mean a negative clearance, that doesn't mean squeezing. You need exactly zero clearance. And so that seems like it's gonna be really hard, but let me assure you it is not difficult, it just takes a little bit of time. The first thing that you're gonna wanna do is take one of your output covers, go ahead and dry install your gasket here, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and install, we're gonna go ahead and bolt this down onto our gearbox here. So let me do that real quick. Now with the first output cover on, you're gonna wanna take a rubber mallet, check it out, just got a new rubber mallet too. And you're gonna wanna give that a little tap so that this is perfectly up against your output cover. And then what we're gonna do is take our other gasket right here, put that on this output cover. Now keep in mind that these output covers are identical, so they can go on either side. And then we'll go ahead and put this one on as well. All right, and so with that in place, I'm gonna see if I can show this to you guys a little bit better. What I'm gonna be doing is taking a feeler gauge, that is just a small gauge just like this, and we're gonna start testing the distance between our output cover here and the actual diff carrier bearing right inside here. And that is going to tell us how much we need to shim it up. So we can fit a 0.025 inch feeler gauge in between that already, so I know for sure that we're gonna have to put some shims in there, and lucky for me, I have some thicker shims, so make sure they are nice and clean before they go back in there if they came off of an old box. But I'm gonna go ahead and loosen these back up, install those, and then retest it. So we've definitely shimmed that up quite a bit, which is great. Let's go ahead and start testing down our range of feeler gauges. Awesome, so now we have zero clearance, and so what that means is that these diff carriers are held in there nice and tight, but not too tight, and they're not gonna spin. So one of the major reasons that you need to preload these things, it's something that for some reason so many people leave out, but it's so important. So this bearing right here, the inside, the part that's actually attached to your differential, is what is spinning, and the outside should stay stationary. And what happens is if this is not correctly preloaded, the outside of the bearing will spin as well. That's called spinning a bearing inside your differential case, and it's not great. It's definitely something that you really don't want to happen. So now that we know the correct amount of shims that we need on our differential, we can take these two covers back off, and then we can install our actual output cover, which goes, this is the bottom, it goes on just like over this. And there are a couple things when you're putting this on. Primarily, you do have to torque this down to a specific spec. Additionally, I want to take this diff out and just clean up these output covers just a little bit because they're nice and because they're pretty rusty, and I want whoever gets this to have a really nice looking output system. So now with your output cover here, there is a seal for these rod change gearboxes that goes over the selector shaft. Now this is a two-step system. You put this first in, and it's just a small aluminum stopper with a little rubber seal in there, and then this seal goes right on top inside the output cover. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those installed. And there we go, so we've got those installed on the output cover, and this is gonna go right down on top, just like that. But don't forget, we need gaskets. So you'll wanna find the gasket that is made for your output cover. So in this case, we have this one that's made for the bottom end of our rod change gearbox. And now what I'm gonna call out here is something pretty important. It's that you don't want these gasket faces to actually intercept the bearing here. So nothing is 100% perfect on our classic minis, and in this case, and this is no different, specifically this bottom one needs just a little bit of trimming in order to perfectly fit on our cover here. And now I'm not talking about anything crazy. You're just gonna wanna trim off a little bit of this gasket here with scissors. Same on the other side. This is assuming it doesn't fit properly. It might fit without any problem. Gonna go ahead and set that back down on here. Now keep in mind, you're also gonna wanna trim it on the outside here. You don't want it to stick out into the output cover because it might compromise the seal there. So you might have to do just a little bit of trimming there as well. All right, and so that is looking really good on both sides now. Now, of course, I've forgotten to get nuts for this, so give me 2 seconds, I'm gonna go grab some. Oh, there we go. All right, so we have all our nuts and bolts now, and it is time to bolt this sucker down. Now, you might think the way that you do this is by simply tightening all these bolts down to spec and being done with it, but there is a little bit of a process, and that involves making sure all the bolts go in when they're supposed to. So let's pull this back off here. And so first off, like I do with all of my gaskets, I put gasket sealer on them. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply that to these gaskets here. Now keep in mind, once I do this, it's kind of like the point of no return, because, well, be covered in gasket sealer. All All right, and now before you torque any of this stuff down, you're gonna wanna install your output covers and put the bolts in finger tight. And the reason we're gonna do it this way is so that when we torque this down, we don't have trouble getting the bolts into these holes. So, gonna start with this side over here with our gasket. So the part that I almost forgot, this is your little detent spring here, and you need this retainer ring to go in. It sits fully flush down in there. Then you put the ball in, then you put your actual spring in. The output cover that gets bolted up on that side is gonna hold all of that in place with this little tab right here. I'm very glad that I didn't forget that. Man, that would have not been great. So now we have all those bolts in place. The last thing that we're gonna do is torque down the cover on the back here. Now, according to my Haynes manual, this needs to get torqued down to 25 foot-pounds, and that just feels kind of low, so I am gonna go ahead and torque it down to 25 foot-pounds. However, I'm gonna leave the tabs that I used to lock this up, I'm gonna leave those unlocked, just because it doesn't feel quite right to me. I'd like some guidance from you guys in the comments. That way I can make sure whoever gets this after me is gonna get a gearbox that is in perfect torqued spec. And that is really that for the whole gearbox. So like I said, please, please, somebody post in the comment section what the torque spec for these actually is. If it is indeed 25 foot-pounds, you know, well, that's done and I'll lock these tabs up. But if it's more than that, please post that in the comment section and I'll come back and lock those down. This gearbox is done and totally ready for somebody to rip on it. It is gonna be an awesome gearbox for whoever ends up buying it. Now, there are a couple things about this. We'll include the remaining gaskets that came in my gasket kit. I think that I forgot to order the seals for the output covers down here, so it is not gonna come with those. However, the rest of the gearbox is totally complete. So with that, I think we can wrap this episode up. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. And, well, it also wraps up the Rod Change Gearbox series. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope that you guys found this helpful because it's a task that is kind of scary if you look at it, you know, broadly, but really once you get into the gearbox, it's not something that you need to be afraid of. You just need to take your time, really start to understand the parts and the things associated with the gearbox, and you won't have any problem repairing or restoring your own gearbox on your Classic. A huge shout out to 7 Mini Parts. They sponsor all of my episodes, including this one. All of the parts that I use in this episode, aside from the tools sent to me by Guessworks, were provided by 7 Mini Parts. If you guys have mini parts needs, check out the links in my description. Any parts that you guys purchase through those links will directly help my channel. I get small kickbacks from any purchases that my viewers make through those links. So if you need parts, click on the links before you head over and get them. Secondly, a huge shout out to Guessworks. Thank you so much, John Guest, for sending me the custom parts that you make. I'm really, really happy with them. I'm so glad that you sent those over. It made disassembling this gearbox, and for that matter, the remote change gearbox that I have, much easier. If you guys are located overseas in Europe, check out Guessworks. He has a broad range of all the internals, bits and bobs for these old Classic Mini gearboxes. But like I said at the beginning of the episode, if you guys feel like supporting the channel and supporting big projects like this, head over to my Patreon or head over to my merch store. Really, it helps me so much to produce these videos and to buy the parts necessary to do the videos themselves. So until the next episode, which I said last time it would be a driving episode, but for real, probably, maybe, for sure, I don't know, is gonna be a driving episode if I can get my Mini running back on the ground again. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy those minis and motor on.